Once upon a time, there lived a kind man named Geppetto. He was a very talented woodcarver and spent his whole life making wonderful wooden creations. Unfortunately, he never had time to start a family. With no wife or children to call his own, the poor man became very lonely and sad. To fill the emptiness in his heart, he built a marionette the size of a child and treated it like a son. "I'll call him Pinocchio," Geppetto said. The wooden boy gave Geppetto more joy than anything else in the world. In the morning, he set the marionette at the table and talked to him as he ate his breakfast. In the afternoon, he take Pinocchio on his errands throughout town. At night, Geppetto tucked him into a bed of his own and read him stories. He put so much love and care into the marionette, and one day it magically came to life. Geppetto watched in amaze as the wooden boy stood up by himself and smiled at him. He thought he was imagining it until the marionette spoke. "Hello, Pinocchio said. "Who are you?" "I'm your father," Geppetto said. "And who am I?" he asked. "You are my son, Pinocchio," Geppetto said. "And a miracle you are, like all parents, now that his child walks and talks." Geppetto found raising him much more difficult. One afternoon, Pinocchio spent too long playing outside and came home covered in the termite. Geppetto carefully removed the bugs from his son's body one by one and sent it over the bite marks. On another day, Pinocchio took a nap on the stove and awoke to find that his feet had been burned off. Geppetto gave him a new pair of shoes and warned him about the dangers of fire. Having a hollow head, Pinocchio had a lot to learn. He asked his father hundreds of questions every day and loved learning about the world they lived in. There was only one question Geppetto didn't have an answer to. "Papa, am I a real boy?" Pinocchio asked. "Well, not exactly," Geppetto said. "Will I ever be a real boy?" the marionette asked. Geppetto was stumped because Pinocchio was the only living marionette. He had never heard about something non-human becoming human. The chance looked slim. However, Geppetto didn't want to hurt his feeling. "Maybe one day," he said. "Perhaps if you go to school and get a good education, you'll become a real boy. Here, take this money and buy school books. You can start school tomorrow." Pinocchio happily collected 5 coins from his father and went into town to purchase his school books. However, along the way, the money in his hands caught the attention of a big cat and fox. The animals were crooks and dogs. Pinocchio would be an easy target. "Good afternoon, my boy," said the fox. "May I ask where you are going with those coins?" "I'm off to the store to buy school books," Pinocchio said. "I'm going to school to get an education so I can become a real boy." "School books?" the cat hissed. "Any real boy knows school isn't a good investment these days. If I were you, I'd take it to the field of miracles. If you plant your coins in the ground, a money tree will grow with hundreds of coins." "Oh my," Pinocchio said. "Geppetto would be so proud of me if I returned home with hundreds of coins. How do I get to the field of miracles?" "Just take this path into the woods and stop at the field," the fox said. "You'll recognize it from all the money trees growing there." The wooden boy giddily changed direction and headed to the field of miracle the cat and fox spoke. Little did he know the animals were following in the trees beside the path. Pinocchio walked and walked, but never found a field. Eventually the sun set and the forest became so dark he could barely see the path in front of him. "Surely I would have found the field of miracles by now," he said. Suddenly, the cat and fox jumped up from the trees and stole the coins from the Pinocchio. Pinocchio had walked right into a trap. "Now let's hang him from a tree," the fox said. "By the time someone finds him, he'll be dead and will be far away." They tied a rope around Pinocchio's waist and hoisted him high into the tree branches. The cat and the fox counted the coins and howled with laughter and their successful escape. They left the wooden boy all alone in the woods. "Help!" Pinocchio shouted. "Someone please help me!" Yelling for help seemed to be of no use. He was so far into the woods, he didn't think anyone would hear him. Luckily for Pinocchio, a beautiful fairy living nearby in the woods heard his cries and came to his aid. A dozen bluebirds carried her above the trees and set her down gently at the base of the tree Pinocchio hung from. "Poor little marionette," the fairy said. "How did you get up there?" Pinocchio was too embarrassed to tell the fairy what had happened, so he made up a story instead. "I climbed up the tree to save a baby bird from the falling out of its nest," he said, "but I slipped and got tangled up into the rope." To his surprise, Pinocchio's nose grew twice in size. It was an odd thing to watch, but an ever odder thing to experience. "Are you telling me a lie?" the fairy asked and put her hands on her hips. "No, that's the honest truth," Pinocchio said. Once again, his nose grew, this time a whole foot longer than it was before. "What's happening to me?" Pinocchio said. "You have been blessed with an honest heart, which means your nose grows every time you lie," the fairy said. "I'll give you one last chance to tell me the truth. Otherwise, I'll return home and leave you here." Pinocchio told the fairy how Geppetto had given him 5 gold coins to buy school books, but he had been tricked into the woods by a cat and fox who told him about a field of miracles. Then he told her how the animals had hung him up in the tree and left him there. "I'll help you down, but only if you promise to tell your father the truth when you get home," the fairy said. "And you must go to school tomorrow like he wished." "I promised," Pinocchio said. The fairy knew he was telling the truth because his nose stayed the same size. She waved her wand, and a flock of woodpeckers flew in from all corners of the forest. They charged Pinocchio's nose back to normal and pecked the rope until it broke and Pinocchio fell to the ground. "Thank you so much," Pinocchio said to the fairy. The wooden boy ran down the path toward town and didn't stop until he was home. Once he was back in Geppetto's workshop, he burst into tears and told his father everything that happened to him. There, Pinocchio," Geppetto said. "Part of being a real boy is making mistakes. I'll give you 5 more coins, and you can buy school books tomorrow. The next day, the woodcarver placed 5 gold coins in the wooden boy's hands and sent him on his way. Along the way, a large coach pulled up on the side of the road and blocked him from going any farther. The coach was filled with dozens of rowdy little boys, Pinocchio's size. "Care to join?" the coachman asked. "Where are you going?" Pinocchio asked. "Catch Fool's Island," the coachman replied. "Every little boy's paradise. I'm only charging 5 coins a head for transportation." "I'm sorry, mister," Pinocchio said, "but I'm on my way to the store to buy school books, so I can't become a real boy." "But you can't become a real boy unless you know how to have fun like a real boy," the coachman said. Pinocchio didn't need to hear anymore. He handed the coachman his gold coins and joined the other boys in the back. They were a loud and rambunctious group. They wrestled, pushed each other around, and pulled one another's hair as the coach traveled away from town. It took all day for the coach to reach the shore, and then it boarded a large boat. The boat sailed across the ocean for 2 days and arrived at Cageful Island. The island was nothing like Pinocchio had expected. Little boys ran amok everywhere he looked, smashing things with clubs and hammers. They kicked puppies, tied cats' tails together, and caught butterflies on to trip their wings off. "If this is real fun, I don't want any part of it," Pinocchio said. "Hey, look at him," said a boy who pointed at Pinocchio. "He's made of wood. Let's tear him apart and make a campfire of him." The unruly boy chased Pinocchio all over the island. Thanks to his wooden legs, he was able to outrun them and hid from them on the beach. "I should have obeyed my father and the fairy," Pinocchio said to himself. "If I had just gone to the store instead of boarding the coach, I wouldn't be in this mess. Now I'll never be a real boy." Thankfully, the fairy he had met in the woods had worried that the marionette would get into more trouble, so he had kept an eye on him. A dozen seagulls carried her across the ocean and set her down next to Pinocchio on the beach. "In a jam again, I see," she said. "Oh, fairy, please help me off this island," Pinocchio said. "How did you end up in a place like this?" she asked. Once again, Pinocchio was too ashamed to tell the fairy the truth, so he made up another story. "I was kidnapped by thieves and brought here," he said. Just as before, Pinocchio's nose grew twice in size. Now, lying doesn't get you anywhere," the fairy said, and shook her finger at him. "I'm happy to help you one last time, but only if you tell me the truth." Pinocchio told the fairy how he had crossed paths with the coach, taking the boys to Cageful's Island on his way to the store. He told her he had thought if he had the real fun the coachman described it would bring him closer to becoming a real boy. Being a real boy isn't always about having fun. Sometimes it's about making good choices, the fairy said. "If you promise to go to school like your father wants, I'll take you home." "I promise," Pinocchio said. The fairy knew he was telling the truth because his nose didn't grow anymore. She waved her wand, and a swarm of beetles crowded up from the sand and chewed his nose down to its normal size. They took him by the arms and flew him across the ocean and dropped him off at the door of Geppetto's workshop. Pinocchio ran through the door, but Geppetto was nowhere to be found. He looked through the town but still couldn't find his father anywhere. Finally, he went to the house of the old woman who lived next door and asked her if she had seen Geppetto. "Oh, you poor dear, you haven't heard the news?" the woman asked. The wooden boy shook his hollow head. "Geppetto heard you went to Catchful Island, so he borrowed a boat and went looking for you at sea," the neighbor said. "But his boat was swallowed whole by a terrible whale." "Oh no," Pinocchio said. "I must find and rescue him just like the fairy rescued me." He didn't want to break the promise he had made to the fairy, but he would have done anything to save his father. Pinocchio returned to the shore and dived into the water. He floated well above the waves, which helped him swim. Pinocchio swam and swam, but he didn't find the whale anywhere it found him. The whale swallowed Pinocchio in one bit and slid down its throat into its stomach. It was very dark and cold inside the whale. Pinocchio couldn't see anything, and he doubted his father had survived. Then just he lost all hope. Something tapped his shoulder and he heard a family voice. "Pinocchio, what are you doing here?" said Geppetto. "Papa, you are alive," Pinocchio said, and threw his arms around him. "It's good to see you, my son, but you shouldn't have come here," Geppetto said. "Now we'll both become a meal for the world." The whale suddenly started to cough. Pinocchio had filled his throat with splinters and irritated the whale greatly. In one strong heave, the whale caught up to the wood carver and the marionette and spit them back into the ocean. Had Pinocchio not been there, Geppetto would have drowned, but the wood carver used his son as a raft and swam back to shore. By the time they got back to the workshop, they were both exhausted and soaking wet, and they smelled terribly of fish. To their surprise, the fairy was waiting for them inside. "I'm so sorry I broke your promise," Pinocchio told the fairy. "I wanted to go to school and become a real boy, but being a real boy was pointless if I didn't have a real father to come home to." Geppetto and the fairy very touched by his son's words. "That's exactly why I've come," Pinocchio the fairy said. "You may have a hollow head, but you have a heart of gold. Like I said, part of being a real boy is making good choice, and choosing to save your father was a very brave one. It would be my honor to turn you into a real boy." The fairy waved her wand, and Pinocchio's wooden body turned into flesh. He was a real boy. Pinocchio jumped up and down with joy. Geppetto swung his son through the air and held him in his arms. Both the marionette and the wood carver's dream had come true, and they lived as happily ever after as two real boys could.